What if I told you that the most quietly powerful woman in the British royal family finally decided she had watched enough, and that on a single afternoon inside Buckingham Palace, she did something so precisely calculated, so deeply personal, and so publicly unmistakable that it reopened a wound the institution had spent nearly 3 decades trying to close forever. The date is June 24th. The occasion is Princess Charlotte's birthday reception. The setting is the Queen's audience room, gold light spilling through the tall windows, a soft murmur of voices, teacups on silver trays, and, at the center of it all, a small 9-year-old girl who does not yet understand that she is about to become the physical vessel of a message aimed directly at Queen Camilla. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what Princess Anne placed on Charlotte's head, why she chose that specific piece from that specific vault on that specific afternoon, and what she said quietly to Camilla in the corridor afterward that caused 2 senior members of household staff to leave the room without being asked. Before we go any further, hit subscribe, because this story is one the palace has been quietly trying to keep off the record for weeks, and it will leave you speechless. To understand what happened in the Queen's audience room that afternoon, you have to understand what Princess Anne is, and what she has always refused to be. She is the second child and only daughter of the late Queen Elizabeth II. She is 74 years old. She undertakes more official engagements per year than any other member of the family, and has done so for more than 2 decades. She lives at Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire, a working estate of roughly 730 acres, and she has, throughout her entire adult life, been described by household staff as the one member of the family who neither courts the press nor fears it. Anne does not leak. Anne does not perform. Anne does not, according to those who have worked alongside her for 30 years, forget, and that last word is the one that matters here. Because Anne remembers Diana. Not the tabloid Diana. Not the icon Diana, the sister-in-law Diana, the young woman who arrived at Balmoral in the summer of 1981, unsure of every fork on the table. The mother Diana, who once, according to a former equerry, sat on the floor of a nursery corridor at Kensington Palace with her shoes off and her hair down, laughing until she cried because William had drawn a picture of a horse and labeled it Aunt Anne. Anne remembers all of it. And Anne, according to sources close to the family, has spent the last 2 years quietly noticing something that no one at the palace has said out loud. Diana is being erased. Not loudly, not officially, not in any single act you could point to and photograph, but in a slow, steady administrative way. A tiara reassigned. A portrait moved from a public corridor to a private study. A book of poetry, John Donne's Holy Sonnets, gifted to Diana by her grandmother and returned to the royal collection after her death, quietly recatalogued last spring under a different provenance line. A charitable patronage folded into another. A jewelry piece described in the household inventory as on loan to the consort rather than held in trust for the family of the late Princess of Wales. Small things. Bureaucratic things. The kind of things that only someone who has watched palaces operate for 74 years would even notice. Anne noticed. And here is the part nobody expected. Anne did not go to Charles. Anne did not go to William. Anne did not go to the press. Anne went, quietly, to the vault. For nearly 11 months, according to those monitoring the family's internal dynamics, Anne conducted what one former courtier described as a private audit. Not an official one, not a commissioned one, a personal one. She requested inventory lists. She asked, in her own handwriting, for provenance documentation on specific pieces. She wanted to know, item by item, what had belonged to Diana, what had been designated for Diana's descendants, what had been reassigned, and by whom, and when, and under whose signature. She was polite. She was patient. She was, by every account, terrifyingly thorough. And what she found, according to sources close to the family, was a pattern. But here's where it gets even more chilling. One of the pieces on that list, one of the pieces reassigned in the quiet months after the coronation, was a small, delicate diamond tiara that Diana had worn only once in public, at a private dinner in the spring of 1996, and had specifically named in a personal letter as something she hoped would one day be worn by her granddaughter, if she ever had one. That letter, dated May of 1996, was held in a sealed file in Diana's private papers. It was, until 18 months ago, considered lost. It is no longer considered lost. Anne has it. If you've made it this far, hit like, because what happens next is the part the palace never wanted anyone to see. The reception on June 24th was small by palace standards. Around 40 guests, family, godparents, a handful of close friends of William and Catherine, 3 senior members of household staff, and, seated near the window, in a cream jacket with pearl buttons, Queen Camilla. Charlotte arrived with her mother, wearing a pale blue dress and white ballet flats, her hair in a loose braid down her back. Cake was served. Toasts were given. Charles offered a short, warm tribute to his granddaughter. William spoke briefly. Catherine, according to one guest, dabbed her eyes twice and pretended not to. And then Anne stood up. She was not on the program. There was no card noting her remarks. She simply rose from her chair near the middle of the room, walked without hurry to a small side table where a slim mahogany box had been placed earlier that morning by a member of her own household staff, and lifted the lid. The room, according to 2 people present, went very quiet. Camilla, seated across the room, set down her teacup. Anne turned to Charlotte and said, and this is nearly a direct quote, as it was later relayed by someone in the room, "Your grandmother wanted you to have this. She wrote it down long before you were born. I have been keeping it safe until today." Inside the box was the tiara. Small, delicate diamond, the one Diana had worn at that private dinner in the spring of 1996. The one named in the letter dated May of that year. The one that had, according to household inventory records Anne had personally reviewed, been quietly reassigned in the autumn of 2022 to what the record described as consort access under the Coronation Preparation Directive. Anne placed it, with her own hands, on Charlotte's head. There was a silence in the room that several guests later described as unlike any silence they had ever heard inside Buckingham Palace. Charlotte, not entirely sure what was happening, but old enough to sense the weight of the moment, looked at her mother. Catherine, according to one guest, did not move. William, according to another, closed his eyes for a long second and then opened them and looked directly at his aunt. Camilla stood up. She did not shout. Not at first. She crossed the room, her heels sounding against the parquet, and she said something quietly to Anne that only 3 people heard. One of those people, a senior member of the household, has since spoken on the condition of anonymity about what happened next. Camilla, this source says, told Anne that the gesture was inappropriate, that the piece was not hers to give, that a private family reception was not the correct venue for what she called a statement. And Anne, without raising her voice, without any change in her expression, said 7 words back to her. Then perhaps you should not have taken it. Think about that for a moment. Think about the woman who has spent 74 years being described as the most disciplined member of the royal family, the one who never rises to provocation, the one who has walked into more difficult rooms than any other living member of the house, choosing that afternoon, in front of her niece, her nephew, her brother, and her sister-in-law, to say those 7 words out loud. That is not temper. That is a decision. A decision made months in advance, refined week by week, and delivered at the moment of maximum precision. Camilla, according to 2 witnesses, did not respond immediately. Her face, one of them said, went very still. She turned, walked back to her chair, picked up her handbag, and left the room. She did not return. Charles, according to a 3rd source, did not speak for nearly a full minute after she left. Then he stood, walked across the room to Charlotte, kissed the top of her head just below where the tiara rested, and said something to her too quietly for anyone else to hear. He did not look at Anne. He did not need to. But here's the thing. The confrontation in the audience room was not the real confrontation. The real confrontation happened 40 minutes later, in a corridor outside the yellow drawing room, where Anne intercepted Camilla as she was preparing to leave the palace entirely. 2 members of household staff who were present in the corridor left the area, according to one of them, without being asked, because they understood in that moment that they were not supposed to hear what was about to be said. What was said in that corridor has never been officially reported. But according to a source close to the family who spoke to those who were nearby, Anne handed Camilla a single, folded piece of paper. It was a copy, not the original. Diana's letter of May 1996. The one naming the tiara, the one specifying that it should pass, if the circumstances ever arose, to a granddaughter. Anne, according to this account, said only one thing as she handed it over. The original is somewhere you cannot reach it. Camilla, according to the same account, did not read the paper in the corridor. She folded it once more, placed it inside her handbag, and walked out of the palace without another word. The immediate aftermath was, in the way of these things, quiet. There was no press release. There was no statement from Clarence House. There was no leak from Kensington Palace, which is itself notable because Kensington Palace leaks when it wants to. The absence of a leak, in this case, according to those who watch these patterns, is its own message. William, sources say, was informed of the corridor exchange by Anne herself that evening. Catherine, according to one source, spoke with Anne privately the following morning for nearly 2 hours. Charles, according to another, requested a full copy of Anne's private audit within 48 hours. He received it. What was in that audit has not been made public, but those who have been briefed on portions of it describe a document that is, in the words of one person, not an accusation, but an inventory. It lists items, it lists dates, it lists signatures. It does not editorialize. It does not need to. The inventory, according to this person, is enough. Now ask yourself something. What does it mean? Structurally, when the most disciplined member of the royal family, the one who has spent her entire adult life protecting the institution from itself, decides that the institution has now become the thing she needs to protect her late sister-in-law from. What does it mean when the vault is no longer trusted? What does it mean when the letter, sealed for nearly 30 years, is finally used? What does it mean when a 9-year-old girl walks out of her own birthday reception wearing a piece of history that was, until that afternoon, catalogued under someone else's name? It means the machinery of the monarchy is no longer entirely in the hands of the people who thought they controlled it. It means Diana, 28 years after her death, still has a voice inside the palace. And that voice, this time, is being carried by the one person no one thought would ever raise it on her behalf. It means the quiet erasure is over. Household staff, according to sources close to the family, describe an atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace in the weeks since June 24th that is unlike anything they have experienced. Not tense in the loud way. Tense in the careful way. Doors closed more often, meetings held in smaller rooms. Certain names, according to one staffer, are no longer spoken casually in corridors. A tiara that had, for 18 months, been listed on a consort access line has, according to internal documentation, been quietly recatalogued. It now sits in a different vault, under a different classification, and its provenance line reads in full, held in trust for the granddaughter of Diana, Princess of Wales, per personal letter dated May 1996. Camilla, since the reception, has undertaken a reduced schedule of engagements. Whether that is coincidence, whether it is illness, whether it is strategy, no one outside the household can say with certainty. But those who monitor the family's internal dynamics note that she has not been photographed alone with Charlotte since. She has not been photographed alone with Anne at all. And in a family whose public appearances are choreographed months in advance, the absence of a photograph can say more than any statement ever could. The ripple effects, according to royal watchers, are still unfolding. Charles, sources say, has instructed the royal collection to conduct a full and independent provenance review of every item associated with the late Princess of Wales. William, according to one source, has requested that all items designated in Diana's personal papers for her descendants be transferred, formally and irrevocably, into a trust structure controlled jointly by himself and his brother. his brother. Read that sentence again. William, who has not been in the same room as Harry in more than a year, has requested a joint trust structure. That request, if it holds, would be the first meaningful legal cooperation between the two brothers since the funeral of the late Queen. It would also be, according to those who understand the internal geometry of the family, entirely Anne's doing. She did not confront Camilla to win a fight. She confronted Camilla to reopen a door. And here is the closing truth of this story, the one that will sit with you long after the video ends. Anne did not do this for herself. Anne does not want the credit. Anne, according to those who know her best, is already back at Gatcombe, already returned to her horses, her engagements, her early mornings, and her quiet dinners. She has not spoken publicly about the reception. She will not. She does not need to. She placed the tiara on the child's head. She handed the letter to the Queen. She said the 7 words in the corridor. And then she went home. That is who she is. But there is one more person we have not talked about yet, because somewhere in Montecito, California, a man who has spent the last 5 years being told he betrayed his family received a phone call late in the evening on June 24th from an aunt he has always trusted. What was said on that phone call has not been reported, but sources close to the family say that Harry, for the first time in nearly 2 years, has been quietly asked to consider returning to the United Kingdom for a private family meeting. Not a reconciliation. Not yet. A meeting. And what happens in that room, if the meeting takes place, may be even more shocking than what happened in the Queen's audience room on the afternoon of June 24th. If you've made it this far, hit like. Because stories like this do not stay buried for long. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the next chapter of this family's reckoning is already being written in rooms the public will never see. And when it finally reaches the surface, it will not arrive as a rumor. It will arrive as a document. Signed, dated, and impossible to ignore. The tiara is on the child's head. The letter is out of the vault. The corridor is empty, and somewhere in a quiet room at Buckingham Palace, a light is still on long after the reception has ended, because the woman who thought she had finally closed the chapter on Diana has just been handed proof that the chapter was never hers to close. The palace built its identity on control. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, it is no longer in control of its own house.